All right, how's it going? Okay, so I wanted to go through task three a little bit. As usual, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I also don't want you going into this completely blind. So I'll go through the first 6 or 7 slides that cover the pass and the merit criteria. I won't talk about the distinction stuff today. I'll leave that till a bit later on in the week. Um, but it's fairly straightforward. So we've got how you created your character, how you created your props, the 2 different types of props, how you created your environment, and then a couple of slides on how you create the game level itself. And then this is where you're going to embed your gameplay video and talk about soundtrack and sound effects for the merit. So I'll talk a little bit about this. I'll show you a couple of exemplars, or we'll see how we're doing for time, but I'll certainly show you an exemplar version of this document. Clearly, we need a game finished to complete this task. So I'm really hoping that everyone has that all wrapped up now. I'll possibly do some kind of straw poll on Classroom to work out how everyone is progressing with that. Anyway, so this first slide, we do need to demonstrate how we've created these elements. So we have to demonstrate how we have created the character, so including screenshots from the process. So very similar to the E4 project, where we in our production document had to do a similar thing. There's only 2 slides here, 2 boxes where we need to include process shots. So hopefully that's not too much of a chore. You may need to reverse engineer your character development a little bit so that you can try and show 2 shots from the actual modeling process of your character. Or if you've been making 2D pixel art, similar sort of situation, can you show that character being created in the software, and try and show a couple of stages of that development. And then, so most of these refer to, I'm kind of making the assumption that most of you are making 3D games. So when I talk about wireframes, this is the finished model, showing a wireframe, talking about poly count. This is obviously an optimization issue. So talk about the wireframe, talk about the polygons that you've used, the triangles, the quads, get the count from Blender, and talk about the optimization of that model. And then here we just have the finished version, the sort of rendered version of your character. And then the sorts of things we can talk about there would be, well, you could certainly link it with the optimization and talk about how well it's actually rendering in the final view. You can talk about the frame rate. That might be one way to deal with it. Or just summing up a little bit about how your character actually acts in your environment. Okay, so we have 2 different types of props that are required in your game. We need and this is how it's worded in the spec once again. So we have a non-moving or a static prop. So it's described as a static or a physics prop. So either a static prop that a tree that just stands there, you bump into it if you move towards it, or it could be something that you have to move around. That's almost as insignificant but has some physics on it. So in one of the games I made, I had a guy in a kind of warehouse. You've possibly seen it, where I'm kind of trying to run away from zombies, and I can just move some crates around. They're basically static props that have some rigid body or dynamic physics on them. They don't serve any purpose other than to hide behind or move around. And so, yeah, same deal. 2 frames here of the process that you took to make that static prop. Same thing, wireframe, discussing the optimization of that model, and then the finished view of that rendered in the sort of lighting that you have in your game. And then the next type of prop is some kind of dynamic moving prop. So this could be a bullet, or this could be something interactive, really, in terms of, so a bullet's interactive in in terms of its doing damage to you or the enemies. But it could be something like it could be a crate again that you have to pick up and place on a pressure plate of some kind that then opens a door. And I'll be showing you an example like that in a minute. So again, same deal, screenshots of the process, optimization, finished version of the model in this last box here. We then have the environment, which is slightly different to the game level. So the environment is the actual game level itself. This is all the things, all of your elements and assets together. So this is purely how you made your environment. Same deal. So how you made the level. These 4 boxes might actually not be enough for you to discuss your whole level. Depends how large your environment is, but same thing. Talk about how you made your environment and add some nice screenshots and plenty of annotations, please. And then, like I said, the game level is all those things combined. So your environment combined with your props, combined with your character. So the first one here, screenshot of your character in game, and talking about how that character works. If you've made a first-person game, just include a screenshot of, the camera parented to a cube. That's absolutely fine. Get that screenshot in there and talk about how that works. So discussing the actual logic or the code if you've been using Unity. Okay. Same thing with the props. Make sure we see a screenshot of your prop actually in game, in situ, in the environment, and the same thing talking about what that prop does. So this would be your static prop. This will be your dynamic interactive prop. Same thing. Talk about the logic, and then a fully rendered texture view of the finished game level itself, and just discuss how you made it, what issues you might have had, that kind of thing. It's just a little paragraph there talking about how you made that game level. And then we've got 2 slides on the level. The second slide is about the sound and some of the dynamic elements that relate to your character. So screenshot here of how you control the soundtrack. This will be a screenshot of the code or of the logic bricks. So we need a soundtrack and we need separate sound effects. So something that you found online that's royalty free. Please make sure you get things that are royalty free. Screenshot the logic. Talk about how that actually works, and I'll show you a little example of the sort of detail we need in a minute. So yes, dynamic character elements. So this is things like movement. So we need to show 2 different dynamic elements, such as character movement and maybe how your character collides with something in the game, whether that is a collectible or a lever that the character pulls, whatever it might be. Dynamic elements, 2 of them, please. Screenshotting the logic or the code and talking about what that code means, please. And then we've got a whole slide dedicated to your gameplay video. So I'd like you to embed a gameplay video in here. I know that's a bit of a chore, but it's only a couple of minutes long. You playing through your game, demonstrating the sound effects, demonstrating the soundtrack. Same situation we had with Unit 4, where we have a moderator who's not necessarily going to be able to pick through your game and recognize what's happening. So you need to show off the soundtrack and the sound effects. So make sure that you're capturing the audio outputting from your computer, and make sure you show those props in the gameplay. Show the character and the props interacting within your gameplay. And then I would like you to justify, so a brief justification of how the sound and the soundtrack specifically are appropriate to the type of game. So talking about genre conventions, talking about audience expectations to make sure you get the merit grade. Okay, I would really like you to give examples. In the exemplar that I'm about to show you, which is really good in all other areas, it's actually really weak in this merit thing. So we'll come back to that in a second, but make sure you talk about other games that that allow you to discuss things like trends and what the audiences actually expect to hear when it comes to sound effects and soundtracks. They're really important parts of your game design. They make a huge difference to how your audience engages with the game. And then we've got these two distinction slides. So, this is going to be quite significant. It's going to be a significant amount of writing here. And I will need to talk to you more about how to write an actual evaluation, a proper kind of university standard almost evaluation. It's not going to be as long as a university essay, but we're going to use university techniques to evaluate and this your game and how it's engaging the audience, just to make sure we get and nail that distinction criteria. This one here, a lot more straightforward. We'll be analysing how, or you'll be discussing how your game can be developed further. This is easy. You can do this, but with your eyes closed. So let's quickly have a look through an example. Okay, so may as well present this. Okay, so we've got this frog dude. We've got some crates. We have a rock or a stone. So this was the interactive prop. We have some environment elements. So this student made modular pieces, which he stitched together in Blender. So made lots of different components that he could then use to build his dungeon with. And then we've got a couple of slides on how we created the game. He's actually axed a box here, which is a bit of a no-no. And then this is what I was talking about earlier. I didn't write very much for the merit criteria. So we'll just go back through that and just pick out a couple of the key things. So, yeah, basic screenshot of the character's head here. And then, how he added the eyes. A little bit of technical discussion about subdividing, scaling on axes, subdivision, surface modifiers. So use some of the technical terminology, just in exactly the same way that you did with your production documents for your animations. Then we have that wireframe version, and we have the finished render showing the materials, talking about more technical elements like the specular, explaining that briefly, right? It's not an awful lot of detail, but make sure you talk about polycount and optimization. The student has not done that, but he has talked about, he's talking more about how he made this character. And then this is actually a moving in his game. It's a prop that has some physics on it, like the crate I was talking about in my game. Where you can push it about and you can get from one platform to another by moving the crate into position. So he talks about how he made that crate using a 5x5 Blender unit cube and insetting the sides. So technical terms coming in here, using the knife tool, what tools is used. So he has mentioned polycount, but very briefly. I think I'd like a little bit more there about how polycount affects frame rate. And then we've got the finished render, talking about the basic color. Texture is but a basic color, as the intention is to make the object stand out among the stone, so the rest of his environment is made out of stone. So they can pick out that this is something different and therefore understand that it's part of the puzzle. And the dynamic prop, this is an interactive rock that the characters need to pick up, like I mentioned earlier, and place on a pressure plate, I think, if I remember correctly, which then opens a door. So that was how this student interpreted this dynamic interactive prop. And again, just a bit of discussion, a little bit on the brief side, talking about subsurfs, showing that subsurf modifier in wireframe mode. Bit of very brief discussion on the texturing there. I'm sure you could write more on how the texturing process works. This is another example of a student who maybe spent a little bit too much time on the game and slightly neglected the paperwork, but that allows me to flag those issues up. Yeah, and then on the environment, talking about that modular piece, which was then able to be stitched together in his game, assembled into walls and so on, using unwrapping process, talking about the grids that he used to make these pieces link together. And then creating the game level, we've got the character in situ. My character consists of 3 parts: collision mesh, an inventory, which is so he's able to keep track of what objects it picks up, movement, the movement on the controls, the movement on the particular axis, talking about the relationship with the cameras, then the slides about the props. So here we have the interactive prop, the stones that can be picked up via a button press when hovering over that object and then being placed onto the these pressure plates here. And then talking about that physics object and how that can be pushed off the platform there. So there's a little sort of platform that this crate's sitting on. You can push that off and then you can jump. So you walk up this wall, push this off, jump from here to the crate to here, and you can see the lever that he's got to get to. So very simple puzzle. And then we can see the whole level as one, discussing the positions of the different puzzles that the player has to solve to get from the beginning to the end. And then, like I said earlier, maybe a bit more detail could have been added to these, but this is just that explanation of how the logic works for the sound. So the sound brick plays a music track on loop end, which means it'll play until the end and then loop. This is the basic logic for my character's footsteps, 2 sensors that must be active in order for the footsteps to be heard. So explaining, briefly, but at a level where we can actually understand. It's not a detailed how-to guide on how you make a game, but it is showing that you understand what this logic actually does. So talking here about the levers for the doors are opened with hovering over them and pressing E. The player must be nearby and the property pulled must be less than 1. So just, a good general summary of how the logic makes that lever interactive. Gameplay video, you know what these look like. Frogman. So we can hear the background soundtrack. Should get some footsteps in a second. And here you can see that wall that the character climbs up. So he's showing how the character, it's essentially playing through every element of your game as you know. So he's pushing that crate onto the ground. You can then jump from this platform to the crate to the next platform. Simple stuff. You can see the objective, which is to hit the lever. You can work out from the environment what needs to be done to get to that lever. And here comes the interactive stone or boulder that needs to be picked up. So you can see you can't get through at the moment, just to solve that problem. Anyway, we'll be here all night if we just sit watching people play their own games on YouTube. Come on, full screen, what are you doing? Escape. All right, so I hope you're still awake and everybody is well. I hope it's all going good with you guys, wherever you are. And I think we'll leave it there. There is, if anybody wants more clarification on 2D games and how to deal with that, then we can look at that, I suppose. But, I'm sure you get the idea from that. Here's just a brief summary of the student who did make a 2D game. That music is moody, but I think we can leave it alone there. Talking about the software that the student used to create the pixel art. So I created the crowbar in Pascal as it automatically had a transparent background, blah, 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 blah. So nice level of detail on the annotations on this one. This is much more significant and much more likely to meet the grade criteria. So, please be careful when it comes to adding enough detail. All right, you can see what you've got in store when it comes to the evaluation and the further development. Okay, I'll see you on Classroom soon. Cheers, folks.